change was merged. And there's an issue.
Okay, sounds good. We may go back and update that number. I couldn't find that particular number, so I think that yeah, for some reason that's coming up as a Python, an old Python PR. So maybe we just have the wrong PR number.
Let me update it. Then sorry, I added it.
Oh, okay.
I thought it was good just for the community.
No, I think it's good. I just was checking on it because it came in after I did them last night, and
it is swapped actually. It is 8683.
Yeah.
Not 8386.
It's 8836. Is that what you said?
8683.
8683. Okay, I got all updated here. 8683. Okay, perfect. Okay, welcome everyone. Did we get the recording going? Okay. Thanks for joining. Happy Wednesday. And it's been, I believe, 2 or 3 weeks since the last time we got together. So as usual, let's run through some highlights. And then we'll go through a little bit of discussion about the releases that have happened. There are actually a number of them over the past couple weeks. And then we've got quite a few items to discuss. So hopefully we have time to get through things and the right people in the room. So first of all, thank you, JB, for renaming the master branch. This is something that everybody should be aware of. I think we've made announcements on the dev list, but just remember that the main branch is now the head of the repo. If you haven't made changes or rebased from main, you probably want to do that. I don't actually know what happens if you try and pull from master at this point. JB, does it not exist, or will you get some sort of error or something like that?
No, for now, if you still fetch from master, you're going to be redirected to main for some time. So it's completely transparent for now. Okay,
so just something to be aware of. We also have a couple other repos that showed up. So Foco, when we moved the Python repo, did that also start with main?
Yeah, that's all main. So we're good there.
Okay, and I think the other ones are new enough that the default was main, so there isn't any sort of inconsistency across the projects, which is good. The next couple of items, a little bit of cleanup and a little bit of addition. So we finally have APIs for getting the UUID of a table. I think that was just previously exposed for a table, and we added it into the Vue implementation APIs and I believe Spec as well. So for anybody who is doing operations on a table, and it really matters that you understand which specific version of the table that you happen to be working on, the UUID is there. So that's great to get done. The next one, thanks Anton. There's actually some cleanup for file I/O. This is largely, around resource management, especially in systems like Spark, where we're opening files and resources on executors and making sure that we're cleaning those up. I think there were actually a couple call outs in the Slack channel around seeing some of the messaging we have for places where these are not being cleaned up appropriately. So you'll see like a stack trace around where file I/O was created. We want to do everything we can to be good citizens for the cluster and make sure we clean those things up. So hopefully this is a good step in that direction, but there may still be places where we're leaking. So if you do see instances of that, it would be great if we can, get eyes on where that's happening and hopefully come to some sort of solution for making sure cleanup is happening. The next one, Anton added this, which was an optimization for not having to rewrite manifests in B2 tables. So that's a nice one to include. It's mostly, due to snapshot inheritance, you don't need to rewrite those manifests. I don't know if there's anything else in particular that is important there. Do we have Anton today? We don't. So we'll just move on. The next one, partition stats. I believe that this was just merged this morning. So it's great to see that going in. It's a pretty lengthy PR, and I assume that we've got the spec now, and we'll be moving on to some of the implementation for this. And then the last one is nanosecond timestamp for V3. Thank you very much, Jacob. Since you are here, do you want to give just a quick overview of where things are with the timestamp, the spec, and what kind of follow-on you see coming?
Yep, so I've got a PR open and kind of using CI for testing at this point. I'm getting more familiar with the project, but a PR open to implement this in Java next. So I hope that it's ready in the next day.
Okay. Any other highlights anybody wants to call out, things that we may have missed? This isn't everything that went in. These are the major ones that I thought, you know, people would be interested in hearing about, but anything else? Okay, let's move on to releases. So we've had 3 releases in the past few weeks, and the first one of those, I'm actually start with the Python release. So Fako, if you want to just briefly discuss what went into that release and, you know, what the reason for the patch release was.
Yeah, sure. So we had issues where we parse a SQL from a string, so you can actually do like string predicates that follow like standard SQL syntax, and it would not parse the whole string. So it would only, if you had like multiple end predicates, it would only take like the first 2 and just ignore the rest of it. So it's highly recommended, just even if you use this to update to the latest version. And apart from that, there were some small patches around docs. So it's good just to the latest version.
Okay, and so that one is out now, and so if you're using SQL especially, you should probably update to 0.51. The next 2, the 1.41 and 1.42 releases were related to an issue that was found with 1.40. We saw a couple people in the open source community that ran into this issue, but it was related to the split offset handling in manifests. And the underlying issue was just related to when the manifests were actually writing out the split offsets, they were doing object reuse, and unfortunately that carried over values that were incorrect. And so what was happening is, or at least what was manifesting, was the split offsets would calculate a value that ended up being negative, and that would cause problems for Spark. So you'll see that error message of like, you know, split offset size negative, and your read will fail. Important things to note, there's no real data correctness issue here. This is purely the metadata and the way in which the split offsets are calculated and validated. You could have incorrect split offsets, but you'll still correctly read the data. But in the case where it actually overreaches and you get one of these negative offsets, then it will end up failing. 1.41 addressed one of the cases where this was found, but after the release of 1.41, we found another, which is why we had the 1.42 release. So anybody who is using 1.4 should move to 1.42 to avoid this problem. And I believe if there is any issue with the table, performing a metadata rewrite or something like that with 1.42 should actually clean up the issue. So if you do have a table that's in a bad state, the rewrite metadata procedure should be able to clean that up. Any questions on the releases? Okay. Let's move on to the discussion. Actually, before we move on to the discussion, I now realize that in the highlights, I only covered the Java, and that was probably wrong. Fako, is there anything that you want to call out from the Python side in the last few weeks that is meaningful? And then I don't know if we have anybody for Rust or Go, but I actually did not cover those. Python?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so for Python, we're working very much on the write support. So I have a couple of PRs out there. So if anyone wants to read, feel free to jump in there. Also talk to, I don't know, like if the Rust folks, otherwise I can fill in there as well. We have the initial PR there for the REST catalog scaffolding, and also being worked on implementing like a load table. So that's very exciting. And also further improvements on the readers, and also starting with the writers over there for writing the manifest and the manifest list. I think that's that's going very steadily.
Okay, thank you, Fako. And sorry to the other communities, but we'll make sure we got to go through all of the different repos at this point. One of the challenges of having many repos. Okay, so let's talk about the items under discussion. So the first thing, I think, Bits, is this yours?
I think pretty much. Let me check to see if anybody. No, like all the rest of the discussion is me. If anybody so I can start going through a couple of these things, and if there's something else anybody wants to bring up, like please put it there at the end, and I'll try to speed through some of this stuff. Okay, so yeah, I have a couple proposals. As you all know, I've been working the last month or so on refactoring the documentation and finding just little pieces in terms of like how the release happens and stuff like that. So I've had a couple of different ideas that that I've wanted to just bring out to the community at some point and start having the discussion. So let me see. We'll start with the first one, which is pretty straightforward and easy. I noticed. Actually, I noticed this a while back, but the when I was setting up stuff for the Iceberg logo, notice there was when you have a white background, you don't really pay attention. It looks actually quite normal. There's like almost like a light reflecting off the top of the iceberg. But when I looked at this in the swag store, this Redbubble kind of like shirt, and you could basically buy like all this stuff. I was like, man, I really want to, have this opportunity and push this up onto the Iceberg site. And this is managed by, an Apache entity here. So, I looked at some of the ones with the darker backgrounds, and this is actually an artifact, a hole that was introduced somewhere along the line, maybe when the logo was getting passed between Apache or something like that from Netflix. I'm not sure exactly, but so yeah, gasp. So I want to see if we can get the I assume we just have to get like a vote from the PMCs to make an update. There's already work that's been done internally at Tabular to fix this, went for our own branding stuff. So we could propose that as the fix and see if the PMC is willing to. It basically just closes this gap with like a very similar blue color. So we could push those up on that thread and see if the PMC should just vote. And then JB, you also mentioned there's like some other actions to do there, like to reach out. So if you could even help me out with like who to reach out to once we get that consensus.
Yeah, sure. So basically the PMC is the first step. Then we have just to notify the VP brand from ASF because we changed the logo. And the last thing is the community dev, so the com dev who is handling the different, swag and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So we just have to update them and it's done. So yeah, as soon as the PMC are okay, it should be pretty fast.
Yeah. Like selfishly, this actually was just me wanting to buy an Iceberg shirt, and I didn't want to buy one with that little hole. So, but I actually think like this would be good to, when we go to the Apache, community things. I want to, have all of us be able to rep Apache Iceberg while we're there. So, so anyways, cool. So that's one of the first things, just, more community identity and representation. And then, well, this could have been its own thing outside of this, I guess. But yeah, I want to also propose a, an improvement to our communication and documentation of changes that we're making between releases. This can be something that can kind of be, helpful to, this could be helpful to, the release manager, but also just make sure we don't miss things. So if we look at like, we miss documentation things sometimes, and we'll have these kind of later documentation fixes that come in later, like, oh yeah, I forgot, nobody documented that, right? So in the Trino community, we had, I liked the process that we had there. We essentially, and again, this is not saying that this should be our process, but this is a process that they had where they would have a pull request that would be the update for, the release notes that would go out into the docs. And then as part of that, you know, at the end of the previous release, they would create this pull request, and then, you know, committers would slowly add their own, you know, links there, and then, you know, DevRel type people or anybody who's doing documentation would say the release notes have been, you know, there's like a good enough explanation for us to do release notes, and there's good enough explanation for us to do the docs. And you can click into these, and they even have like, you know, oh, this one didn't have a template. This is Edward. But you know, if they're not user facing, generally we don't, you know, require them to do this thing. So we can get as, you know, formal or like relaxed as we want. I just think we should have a conversation about how should we do maybe a little more of a, you know, tracking. Is this PR something that's user facing that we should be documenting? Is it something that, you know, if we have a release note, is it going to be easy for the release manager to know what to say about this so that we can accurately convey the changes that have happened? And that generally best comes from whoever's actually making the code changes or reviewing the code changes. So, so I just, you know, wanted to start putting our heads together on how do we come up with a good process for this to avoid missing these documentations that end up causing. Dan, you had actually a good anecdote from one of the times that we had missed something, and then it caused like people to forget, like during an upgrade or something, right?
Yeah, you know, this does happen, and it is you know, a gap that is worth considering how best to fill. Like, so the example that we had from a little while ago was when we started removing metrics after a certain number of columns were part of a table. And so like that is definitely something we should have communicated in the release notes. It didn't get out, and it did affect some people. And then they went to the release notes to try and figure out, well, did something change? And it wasn't included. So there's always going to be little things that get missed, but I do think that there is an opportunity for improvement of like, how do we track these things? And like if people are introducing changes that add properties or add configuration, like there probably should be a corresponding doc update for it rather than go hunt through the code and find this hidden property.
Yeah, JB?
Yeah. Can we use the GitHub issues milestone as a start? I mean, to populate the feature update we should do, the documentation update we should do. I mean, starting from the GitHub issues with milestone, we know what is included in milestone, and so we can create the corresponding documentation and check if we have it. Is it possible? Or maybe, I don't know if it's automatic or not, but probably as a start, I would say.
Paco?
Yeah, so we use milestones at the Python side as well. I try to push it for it because it's quite hard to keep like all the changes. I think it works, but it's very easy to forget these kind of milestones. So maybe we should also have some automation there that we, for example, assign like a milestone by default.
Yeah.
And when we start doing the release, we can actually like remove PRs that will not be included in the release. I think that's a better would be a better process of
What we do in some Apache project is we don't allow any issue without a milestone. You have to attach a milestone, an issue, and a milestone. So it's a little bit strict, but we are sure that we include issues in the next milestone, and we create 2 or 3 milestones in advance. So it's what we do in Apache Beam, for instance. So don't know if it works or not, but I mean, for Beam it works fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, you know, I like the idea of using milestones, and we have used them for a while now, especially around like the Java releases. And but it's usually to kind of like capture the last remaining things that we think are necessary to get to a release, as opposed to forcing everyone to indicate a milestone and understand like the milestone tracking, because we do still have quite a few commits that are coming in for various other reasons, little fixes, little patches, little changes here and there that aren't necessarily essential for the release, but they may make or miss the release just when they actually get in. So I don't want to have, all right, I don't think I would be too in favor of like completely shifting this and being a very strict process-based, you know, milestone release. But I do think kind of taking a middle ground where it's like, hey, every milestone will have a release notes issue, and that's the last issue that we would close before we actually close out the milestone and cut the release. And it just kind of forces us into a process of making sure we go through and we document those things. And if that works well, we may get closer and closer to a pattern where people are comfortable like tagging the milestones themselves, or making sure that we have more consistency in how we document everything that's going into it. From the automation perspective, I think that's super important, just because going through manually, you're going to miss things. So we definitely want to have like a generated version of like, here's all the commits that went into the release. That may not be the best curated source, and we can have somebody go through and like tweak it if they need to, but I think we should lean heavily into automation, and then just making sure that we do the last checkpoint of an issue for release notes, so they get done and they get out.
I think like, something that could be considered too is like we have templates, right, that we can put out for issues or for PRs, wherever we end up tracking some of this stuff. And if we have like a checkbox that says, does this, did you do the a good enough write-up for release notes, and then did you, at least to give you enough context for someone else to, summarize the release notes, and then did you, does this need documentation, and did you include that change, or will there be a future change, that needs to be done for this, and mark that as one of the options, and then the automation can be there to say, hey, this has been marked as either note docs, so we can go ahead with it, or it's going to have future docs. Was that docs created, and it's going to fail until we actually have like a PR that we link to it or something. I know that can get really convoluted, but something along those lines. I'm just dreaming here. So
yeah. I mean, it's always good to move towards automation. I think the release manager, as long as we're clear about what that should be, what that sequence should be for them.
Yeah.
I'm very open to like, hey, let's get a proposal for some templates for pull requests. We have them for the bug reports or issue reports. I think the discussion that we had last time largely revolved around, we don't want that to become burdensome on people, though. With a PR, you've already invested a reasonable amount of time like getting things prepared. So checking a box or pointing to another issue for like, hey, yeah, we still need docs for this. That seems pretty reasonable. But let's get some things out there. Let's get PRs for what those templates look like. Again, and just a reminder for everybody, like this is a discussion. This isn't where we make decisions. So all of this we should follow up with the dev list, make sure that we have the larger community and everybody has a chance to kind of put their opinion out there about whether we should or should not do it. But I don't think you're going to get a whole lot of disagreement in terms of like some small templating around pull requests.
Yeah. I did add a discussion to start, talking about this here. So feel free, anybody who's, in the dev list, please bring that up. I haven't linked it yet in the meeting notes, so I'll do that now as we're talking about it. But yeah, I will, just if you want to, or have some interest in this, or have some thoughts and ideas, we'd love to hear it. Where is this? Put this right here for right now. Oh no, that's just a link to the top. Whatever. I'll link it afterwards. Okay, so let me see. We cut all this. We cut all.
Well, let's talk about these two, because you have this like roadmap, GitHub project versus website. I think we had a discuss thread on this, or at least it was covered in some discussion.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. I think I merged these things in when I shouldn't have, into a single topic. So the other thing I was looking at was we're currently tracking, a lot of our roadmap items here in this on the static site. And I just upgraded these, so these are relatively updated, but it seems like it's not a big barrier to entry to get these things updated, but a lot of the changes that we make on these are like one word at a time, and every single time you have to make a change, you have to do a PR pull request. It's quite cumbersome to just do that on a day-to-day basis to keep this up to date. And rather than doing that, I think GitHub, we already practically, this is where I learned about what projects were going on and what was happening. Like we were using this project set up here. If we go, that was not a really active one. What was the view support? You know, so like we're already using this integrated into our process. Like this should actually be the source of truth, I believe, around our around the around the roadmap. And maybe it's, you know, trying to find an easy way, or maybe an embedding type way to, you know, have that show on the website, or at the very least just link it. Hey, if you want to know about the release, this is where you go and look for it. And we will just have to do a much better job at making sure that like we keep up with the you know, project's views.
So Brian, the website currently, what is it linking to for those items? Is it linking to the GitHub project?
Some of them are. Actually, a good majority of them are now, because I just changed it to do that.
Okay.
But some of them were, you know, pointing to issues. It was a little inconsistent, right? And I think that always is another biter, right? If you're not, you know, consistently doing things. I think most of these are. Like this one's just linking to Python. It's like the Buckos and Rust and Go. You know, it's just like that's where you would go and see what's happening there. It's just looking at the PR. So I think in general, you know, centralizing the projects maybe on the main repo or something, and having a good you know, trying to think through how do we organize this in a way where people could just go to the project site and say, oh, okay, this is literally like, you know, the roadmap.
Yeah.
Essentially, maybe there's another way we have to organize it, but.
JB, I know you also had thoughts on this. Do you want to share?
Just thinking loud. My gut feeling is it's pretty hard to maintain these kind of roadmap pages. I mean, more the community will grow. It's going to be pretty challenging because we have different sub-projects, etc. So I think that this page is great for user community standpoint, because people can know what we are working on. But it should be at some point maybe linking to something like, I don't know, again, a GitHub milestone, or I don't know, whatever, just to be able to sync up automatically. Because if we keep this like this, it's going to be super challenging to maintain, and very time consuming. And I think we have all the stuff to do, and we prefer to do features and code more than maintaining this. So my point is, on project like Apache Camel, Kara, FactMQ, stuff like that, we just point to Jira or GitHub issues with a special milestone where we have future dev or something like that, just to give an highlight for the user community.
Okay, and so it sounds like we're kind of circling around the idea of using GitHub projects and linking to those, so that like the specific PRs and issues, they can move somewhat freely, but we don't have to update the site constantly. I think, and I kind of reading into this line that you have on here, which is labels for proposal. I think labels for proposal, maybe label for spec, may be a good way to link to, hey, what are all the related things for a V2 or V3, as well as like all the new proposals. And JB, I think you brought up the point of like, there is some friction working with GitHub because like contributors can't go and do things that necessarily like create a project. So which may be a fair balance, because we don't want like any proposal to automatically become a project, because we need to first have a discussion about the merit of that. Does it really fit within the scope of the project and like what we're trying to do? So an issue is kind of a lighter weight, and we can just tag it with proposal. People can find all of them, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has the full up, you know, orchestration of a GitHub project and everything behind it. And
while we're on that subject too, like that is another reason why we probably couldn't do the strict milestone thing, because if it's a proposal and it's not anything we've adopted officially, then we would also need to have room, or maybe if we have the tag, that could just not include it from that you know, milestone thing. But essentially, you know, like having issues run for this. I think JB, you were though suggesting, what if we use GitHub discussions? And I wanted to give you a chance. Like, so I was the one that suggested issues with proposal. But JB, you were saying, you know, wanting to advocate and possibly looking at GitHub discussions as a.
No, it was just a proposal, and I think you convinced me that it's better to use issues than discussion. Exactly for the reason you brought on the main list, which is basically a discussion is more for user support, stuff like that. and most of the time. And honestly, I think that you're right. It's going to be very confusing to use discussion for kind of roadmap discussion, stuff like that. It's better to use issues and linking with projects. So yeah, no, forget about discussion.
Okay.
It was a good idea.
Yeah. Well, and no, it's not a dumb idea. I think it was just like trying to find something that's out there related to GitHub, kind of around our current process. Does anybody have? I mean, you know, I think we're pretty good with the GitHub issues between me and JB and Dan. Like, is there any other thoughts or suggestions about ways that we could, you know, try to track proposals? Because we use GitHub, we use Google Docs. Like, do we still just use Google Docs, or do we try to like nest everything inside of an issue? Does it matter?
I don't think we need to be strict about that. Like, I would like to have an issue to track it, but if they want to use Google Docs to describe the proposal and to lay out like what the description is, just link to it from the issue. Like, I don't think that the main thing is we want the issue, like any proposals, discoverable.
Yeah.
And in the past, sometimes we've had Google Docs that are just kind of floating out there, and it's, you know, who has the link to it, as opposed to knowing, you know, that you can get to it from an issue. I do want to pause and just like ask Fako, like, is this something that you think is easy to replicate in the Python repo and kind of follow that same convention, or are you thinking differently for Python repo and project management?
No, I'm fully in line with how we do it currently. I don't think we should be super strict. I like Google Docs because you can do comments online, and especially with GitHub issues. Yeah, you can really track revisions, right? You can see that's being edited, and you can go back in time, but it's not really working. Yeah. Especially if you want to get input, I think Google Docs is works very well. Yeah. For me, I don't have a strong opinion, at least, as long as it's not Jira.
No Atlassian. Is anybody here from Rust or Go that have any oppositions to doing this from that perspective? Like I know that you're kind of somewhat doing that as well, Fako, but is there anybody else like, I don't know if we're going to have somebody else kind of lead that effort once it's mostly done.
Yeah, so in Rust, they work a lot with issues, so they have these tracking issues.
Okay.
I just linked one in the comments. I think that works quite well, but then you actually have someone that's in the lead, right? Because that person will like update the issue.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, both of those repos are still pretty early days, and so things are moving rather rapidly. I would encourage that they start using milestones for the actual release, just so they can get into a similar flow of like having a release notes capturing what was going into the particular release. But
let's not get in their way.
I think we don't want process to override progress on those areas right now. Once they get to like a 1.0 release, you know, we probably want to formalize things a little bit more. But
okay, that sounds good. Any other questions on that before? Let me see if this is basically saying more of the same things that are discussed in the discussion. I have one more after this. Is there anything anybody else wants to bring up on the last thing? Or if not here, bring it up on the mailing list, please. Okay, and the final thing I want to propose in my laundry list of proposals that I finally got out is I also, with the documentation changes, notice like we are a bit over the board in terms of consistency when it comes to, like, I mean, anything from capitalizing, you know, projects, the verb and the tone that we're using, the conjugations we're using, and these things sound very small and not very big, but especially if you're, you know, a very fluent or very native English speaker. But I've dealt with a lot of folks all across the globe, and we're growing in the project. We're getting a lot more global presence, and it's better if you can align. Typically, most of the tech guides, Microsoft, Google, and all of them pretty much suggest to, you know, 99% of the time, try to say everything in present tense, so that it is, you know, not a very hard thing to grok or understand. And so Also, removing typical biased language, or to the point of what JB just put in with the master domain changes, just making it more considerate, more conclusive, and also just easier and approachable for people to read, and correct English grammar in the beginning, right? And so I know, adhering to a style guide is not everybody's cup of tea, especially when it's already, not fun to have to document and put all of your, all of the difficult things to articulate into words. But, there's a easy way to do this is, adding a prose linter like Veil. And so I have the link there if you want to dive into it. But essentially, it's just something we can add into part of the process that will, highlight any prose issues, and we can make it strict where it actually, does not allow us to move docs forward, or it can just be a warning that, comes up every time you compile it, and doesn't actually enforce anything. So, I wanted to first bring out, is everybody okay with adopting Microsoft style guide? It's, to me, it was either that or Google. Microsoft's been around slightly longer, but there's really not too much of a difference. There's just a slight variance. And then, using Veil, using a tool or a prose linter like Veil, adding that into the process to kind of help us slowly gear towards enforcing those more and more strictly as we grow the documentation at scale. So
I think the discussion, I think is this discuss thread that you're linking off to.
Yep.
Yeah. So we can have a quick discussion here. I think we should probably follow up on that thread to kind of like just hey, does anybody have any opposition to it? I really don't want to overemphasize like the requirement that people are like really strictly adhering to style guides and things like that, which is why I think the linter or something like that is so important.
Yeah.
Just because we're a large community of all different backgrounds. We don't want to raise high bars in terms of contributions.
Yeah.
So something like this would even be good for me. Like I can definitely use some linting sometimes, especially when it comes to grammar and spelling and things like that. So have you run this on like our current docs?
Oh yeah.
And, I think the biggest thing is like if it just creates a bunch of friction right now that like everything just flags as warning or error, it's going to be really hard to get into a good state.
Yeah. So my proposal would be that if we adopt this, I would happily at some we're going to go through, get all the existing changes going, and then at some point this would be a PR where I would bring Veil and go through all of the things and try to squash all of that at once, and get us to a point where we are pretty much a clean linting, and that's building out the vocabulary even, because it doesn't know about vocabulary about things like Avro, and it blows up on all the Avro spellings. It blows up on all the orc spellings, and all these other things, and should it be capitalized or not? So okay. I'm happy to do the first heavy push at getting that, kind of in a good state at some point down the road when we decide we want to make this move.
JB, you want to jump in?
Yeah, just one thing. And I share what Dan said. We have to remember we have very different background, very large community. So it should not be something too strict. So it should be some kind of, like the Czech license, for instance. We run the Czech license and we have some recommendation or missing thing. I see value as something like this, like helping the contributors to have a better pull request, but it should not be too much strict. I mean, if it's not included in the first pull request, for instance, then we can do things later, just because we have to be very welcoming to contributors, and so that's really important. To help the contributors is fine, but being strict is not so good. So we know that we are already a very kind of high bar kind of community. I mean, people are contributing, are very committed to Iceberg. It's not so easy. So we have to be very welcoming. So helping the contributor, I fully agree with you.
Yeah.
Being too strict is not a good idea, in my opinion.
And what it could also be too is that, it could be anybody who is maintaining the documentation, we don't make that a bar to, making somebody else like, contributing the docs, we have a lower bar there, and then we, have somebody come in every couple months and do a cleanup PR where we go this full strict route and try to get try to hit that every once in a while where we get, back to green, full green, and then having yellows every once in a while, having a couple warnings is fine. That gets us through to avoid. We don't want to avoid progress, right? As we've mentioned a couple times on this, but we do want to keep the quality high. And I think that something along those lines, trying to figure out a process there. And that's definitely something we should, if you all have ideas or if you've all seen something that's worked super well elsewhere, I'm really happy to hear it, and bring that up into discussion. But yeah, I just think I think about it on both sides, the contributor and the user, and so you're constantly having to fight this war between the two of those, and I want to make it as good of an experience on both sides, right? So
I would agree. Like, our user community is growing, disproportionate to the number of committers and how many people are contributing to the project, and so we do want a good experience, but we don't want to hamper people who are working on the project. So let's take that to the discuss thread. Let's kind of follow up, and I do think, like, hey, if there's a easy way to run it automatically with just like a informational thing, that would be great. If it ends up being like, hey, we just run it periodically or maybe before a release and do a little doc cleanup as we're closing the last PRs, that may be a good thing as well.
Yeah.
So let's just not make it too process intensive.
Well, I'm gonna make sure I add all the red tape. No, I'm kidding.
Okay, so there is, just to jump back to actually the discussion last week, kind of moving on from these items, there are still a number of kind of ongoing issues with or open opportunities with the V3 spec. Jacob, huge thanks on taking on some of the timestamp stuff. Everybody loves timestamps. But we do have a couple other types that are under review for kind of addition. So if anybody has any strong opinions about those or is interested in diving into some of the other types, the BLOB type, the JSON B, JSON BSON, whatever type that would actually encompass, like if anybody wants to jump on those and start to explore different approaches there, I think that's a great opportunity to contribute if you're interested. And then there are a couple other things. Jacob, I think we separated the type promotion from the actual timestamp.
Yep. Yeah, I was going to say another bit we could help with is the promotion, because we decided explicitly to keep just this new type thing to its own kind of path in Epic.
Mm-hmm. And Faka, you had raised a couple points about like the actual microsecond precision tracking, and I'm trying to remember, is that an issue with the logical type in Parquet, or?
Yeah, still something I have to dive into. So Avro, we actually have a proposal out just to add like nanosecond timestamps to Avro as well. And for Parquet, I still have to dig into it. Yeah, I have to to give it a try. Yeah.
So Jacob, are you planning on starting to work on some of the micro or the nanosecond implementation?
Yes. Yeah. I've got a PR up, but I'll ask for attention on it later today.
Yeah, I think if Fako is looking into that, and there may be a couple gaps in terms of the formats themselves and how do we represent those things. So that'll be good to follow up on the issue and just make sure that if we need support from any of the other projects like Avro or Parquet, we get those through.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Any other issues in the last 10 minutes? Topics people want to bring up? Releases, anything? Do you have anything keyed up right now, Fako, for the next Python release that you want to get people thinking about or get them interested in?
Yeah, so the next Python release will be about writes, and it will mostly be first with unpartitioned writes and later on the partitioned ones. What I personally now just working on is like the new Avro release. So I worked on like backporting some of the stuff that we do in PyIceberg, but we actually should do arrow. So, for example, things like concatenation of tables, that's now all being pushed down in arrow, which is quite exciting, and will probably also speed up the whole Python implementation quite a bit. So let's see if we can get that in as well.
And on the Java side, I think one of the targets that we have for the 1.5 release is the respec for views. So once we get that, I think that we're going to be starting to work on some of the integrations for the actual engines and views. We'll see how far we get for the 1.5 release, but there is some work to do on the Spark side. So if anybody's interested in helping with that as well, I do believe that there's a path forward where we can implement it purely within Iceberg and then promote that once some of the core implementation is adopted in the upstream Spark project. But that's also an interesting and ongoing effort. Steve?
Hey, Daniel. So I guess this is rather on the Java side 1.4.2 release. So recently, I think we get one of the issues from the Hive community when they're trying to adopt 1.4, they report some bugs. I know right now Amor already sent out the vote requests. I'm trying to understand in general what kind of bug fix we include in the patch release. Like I was trying to understand if it's appropriate or reasonable to including another bug fix.
So I think at this point, since the vote has already gone out, we want to get a release. We can always do a 1.4.3. Like there's no problem doing additional patch releases, but it's pretty clear what the issue is that's being addressed in 1.4.2. And I haven't seen the other issues raised yet. So I think we should probably just, if they are issues that Hive is having, we should just start a 1.4.3, start tracking against that, and get whatever fixes in that they need to the next release.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dan.
I think that there's also been some kind of discussion around for patch releases, we want to make sure that we can get those out and we can address issues as quickly as possible. There may be some small changes to the vote process. I think we currently state that votes don't include weekend days, and I think that should be fair game for patch releases, usually because we're trying to get something out that's pretty urgent. But we're happy to make patch releases. We should be doing those as soon as something serious is identified. The main thing is we don't want to be introducing new functionality or behavior changes in the patch release. And so that's really kind of the line that we've drawn on those. If there are new things that need to be added, or if they need to change how something is working for Hive, that would probably fall into a 1.5 as opposed to, oh, there was just a bug that was found. Does that help, Steve?
Yeah, sounds good, Dan. I think I just some fix. It's not about new features, and I understand what you just described.
Dan, what do you think about 2.0? Should we go for 2.0 after 1.5? Because I think we have a lot of stuff, a lot of APIs that we still want to deprecate at some point, and maybe it's getting time to do that.
I think we need to start preparing for that. That's actually a really great opportunity. There's a lot of work that can be done, and this is a great place for people to contribute if they're interested, because we've got API deprecations, we've got other things that will need to be sorted through in terms of getting the 2.0 release out. If you recall the SEMVer guarantees that we provide, I think we had documented, but the API module, that one we can only really remove things on a major version release. And so any sort of API cleanup or moving things from API module to core module, those kind of things all need to happen in a 2.0 release. And so if there are things that you're interested in cleaning up, we can start preparing and getting some PRs ready to do that. I think we want to wait until the 1.5 release at least to start introducing any breaking changes, because once we start committing those, we're pretty much on a path to a 2.0 release at that point. Anything else you want to add there, Fako? But I agree. I think that we're in position to do a 2.0 release. Addition of views is a great opportunity for that. I think Spec v3 may be kind of in there as well. So it's a matter of like, do we want to align the Spec v3 with the 2.0? That's a big breaking change. Might be nice to have with a major version release. Paco?
No, I think it would be great because yeah, there's a lot of legacy stuff in there that we I think want to get rid of, like the embedded manifest in the metadata. I think nobody's using that anymore, so probably we'll get rid of it. There's like also a milestone, so if there's anything that you need to or that you cannot remove, like in a 1.x release, make sure to add a milestone there so we can keep track of it and see what we have all staged for the 2.0.
Yeah, we have a milestone for 2.0 already. So if you have things you want to pin against it, you can put it there. And I'd lean to just like adding it to 2.0. And if it doesn't make the cut, we can remove it from that milestone and move it to the next one. But it's better to know the scope of what people are looking to do to get into 2.0 as early as possible. And I think that there's a larger question about like, do we retire everything from the V1? That I think we need to have a bigger discussion on. So some of them may be fair to remove, like the embedded manifests. Okay, I think that brings us to the end. Thank you, everyone.